We're in for a treat. We ended on the right note, talking about our energy future here in Utah with that final question. And we're about to move into our final presentation, the Wallace Stegner Lecture. And that is on the topic of our energy future. It's my pleasure to introduce our once and soon to be again colleague, Professor Lincoln Davies, who's currently wrapping up his tenure as the Dean of the Ohio State University Michael E. Moritz College of Law, where he holds the Frank Strong Chair in Law. Lincoln is an internationally recognized expert in energy law and policy. His work includes work in the area of renewables and alternative energy, among several other energy-related topics and fields. His work also intersects with environmental law, that is reconciling the two, energy and environmental law. He's the author of a major casebook on energy law here in the United States, as well as an international treatise on U.S., or a contribution to an international treatise on U.S. energy law. His work, which includes a number of scholarly articles and other research in this area, and also extends to work for the U.S. Department of Energy, the Korean government, and the Brookings Institute. He's been a faculty, he served as the McCoy Fellow in Environmental Policy as a visiting professor at Seoul, that is Korea National University. Also the Kyeonpuk, I'm not going to pronounce that correctly, National University, and the University of Sydney School of Law. As I mentioned, Lincoln previously was on our faculty, where he taught and researched in the area of energy law and policy. And he will be returning to us at the beginning of the next academic year. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce the Wallace Stegner Lecture for this year. You have to come forward now, Lincoln, to address our energy future. So please join me in welcoming back Professor Lincoln Davies.
Thank you for the generous introduction, Professor Kiter, and thank you to the University of Utah Law School, the Wallace Stegner Center, and everyone involved for the kind invitation to speak with you today. It's a tremendous privilege to do anything that bears Wallace Stegner's name. And so I am both deeply honored and profoundly humbled to deliver this year's Stegner Lecture. I am grateful to each of you for your time, to Bob Kiter and Jan Nystrom for their visionary leadership in building the Stegner Center into the vital home for thought and care that it is today, to the Stegner Center's generous donors for their steadfast commitment to the center's vision, purpose, and work, to Brig Daniels for his work helping to shape such an important and edifying symposium, to Ohio State law student Isabella Carone, who assisted with research for this lecture, and to Chris Monty, Krista Jenkins, Cynthia Lane, Suzanne Faddis, and the entire events and tech teams here at Utah Law for their good and diligent efforts to make this all happen. 173,000 terawatts. Remember that. I know it's a big ask. It's late in the afternoon on a Friday. There are a lot of lawyers in the room, and this is math. It's kind of an odd number, but hang on to it. You'll need it in just a bit. 173,000 terawatts. To understand our future, we must first grasp our history. There are 4 stories I'd like to tell today in couplets, so let's begin. Transport yourself with me 2,200 miles and 242 years from here to 257 Pearl Street in the heart of New York City's financial district. The year is 1882. It's September 4th, a warm day, summer-like, just a brief spat of rain, almost 82 degrees. Nearby, the newly constructed Brooklyn Bridge glistens. Outside, horse-drawn carriages clip-clop up and down the streets, avoiding pedestrians, moving businessmen from one meeting to the next. It's a different time. Manhattan has no Statue of Liberty. The iconic monument is still in assembly in Paris. 23 years prior, in Pennsylvania, the first commercial oil well began operation. The incandescent light bulb is not yet quite 3 years old. Most people light their homes with gas lamps or well oil or candles. Across the nation, for many, when the sun sets, darkness falls, and the day is effectively at an end. In Manhattan, it's late in the afternoon, almost 3 o'clock. The mastermind behind 257 Pearl Street is the Wizard of Menlo Park himself, Thomas Alva Edison. Centuries later, Edison is often lionized, but the reality is more complex. Edison is an iconoclast, a paradox, an embodiment of contradiction. As a child, his school teacher called him, quote, a little addled. By age 39, he was a millionaire. One of his first experiments burned his father's barn to the ground, leading Edison to be whipped in the public square. His later experiments led to 1,093 patents, making him history's most prolific inventor. Originally from Milan, Ohio, a perpetual tinker with boundless curiosity who had yeoman jobs in both telegraph and rail, he was brashly proud, arrogant even. He repeatedly ignored or even affirmatively shunned the ideas of others, resulting in many of the greatest minds in the development of electricity to work with Edison at first, only to later leave in disgust. Despite his singularity, others saw him more as an enterprise than an individual. Edison, said one engineer, is in reality a collective noun and means the work of many men. Edison's Pearl Street is actually 2 buildings, 255 and 257. The former is corporate offices. The latter is a modern marvel of engineering. A 4-story building originally erected for commercial purposes, the Edison Electric Light Company retrofit the building with heavy girders, stiff pillars planted on plates resting on 3 feet of solid concrete, and an elaborate iron frame to hold 6 engine and dynamo assemblies. Each assembly weighed 30 tons and could light 1,200 lamps. The combined lot was just 50 feet wide and 100 feet deep, and it changed the world. On this warm September afternoon, Edison gathered 19th century titans of finance at J.P. Morgan's Wall Street offices to witness the realization of his astonishing vision. The same wire that brings the light, Edison had predicted, will also bring power and heat. With the power, you can run an elevator, a sewing machine, or any other mechanical contrivance. There was no question that Edison was ahead of his time. Almost immediately, commentators discarded this idea of electricity as an omnipresent, manipulable energy source as pure fantasy. One British professor declared it the most airy ignorance. Sheer nonsense, he said. The scene then, as 3 o'clock neared, was perhaps not surprising. One man in the room wagered $100 the lights don't go on. Edison's snapped response, taken. Edison lost the bet, but he won much more. Just blocks away, operators at Pearl Street flipped the switch. 106 lamps at J.P. Morgan and another 52 in the New York Times editorial offices flashed to light. And in an instant, Edison's Pearl Street station became the spark that altered how we would use energy forever. Everyone knows Edison, A century after Pearl Street in the early 1990s, at the height of grunge, just 5 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall and in the immediate aftermath of Germany's reunification, another story critical to the energy transition slowly unraveled. It starred someone far less famous. Wolf von Fabeck is not a household name in the United States, but perhaps he should be. A retired soldier from the provincial city of Aachen, an hour west of Cologne and at the intersection of the German, Belgian, and Dutch borders, von Fabeck's tale begins less with an idea than with a dilemma. A nature lover, troubled by both coal-created acid rain and the disaster at Chernobyl, von Fabeck began looking for alternative energy sources. He started with solar. Connecting a panel to his wife's food processor, he found modest success. The blades turned, slowly, von Fabeck noted, but at least it worked. Encouraged, von Fabeck formed a local group, the Solar Energy Supporters Association of Aachen. The group set about to find a way to promote greater solar energy use in Germany, to take the technology mainstream. They quickly landed on an idea borrowed from another city 7 hours to the south. In the Swiss town of Burgdorf, the local utility purchased electricity generated by citizens at a premium. The aim was to incentivize solar panel installations. The utility covered the premium with a 1% surcharge on all customers' power. Von Fabeck and his friends borrowed this idea, tweaked it, and started shopping it to the Aachen City Council. "We were idealists," he said. "Most people are not idealists. They act in their own economic interests. We had to change the market environment so that non-idealists would be rewarded for doing the right thing." The reward von Fabeck sought, the innovation in renewable energy policy that he and his friends conceived, was to cover the cost of solar power rather than just offering a premium on the overall market rate. This change was radical, revolutionary even, and its scope equally as stark. The initial Aachen feed-in tariff paid 2 Deutschmarks per kilowatt hour, or roughly 20 times the price of conventionally generated electricity. In turn, it transformed average citizens into their own utilities. Backed by the government, they could invest in their own electricity, change how the local power was produced, and rest assured there would not be financial risk. Like Edison's Pearl Street station, this new Aachen law, called a feed-in tariff or the Aachen model, had an incredible effect, but not immediately. Time, dissemination, and multiple other developments had to come first before this seed could grow into an undeniable force that today continues to drive the clean energy transition. The stories of Edison and von Fabeck, of Pearl Street and Aachen, have much to teach us about our current energy transition. A core truth these narratives lay bare is that shifts in energy use are neither immediate nor smooth, but rather often gradual and almost always lumpy. Lighting gas prices plummeted almost as soon as Edison announced his incandescent bulb. But a year after Pearl Street opened, the facility had barely 500 customers, and it was losing money. The broader process of electrifying the nation would take decades and scores of further innovations. In fact, the Pearl Street station was not even around to see this. Partially destroyed in an 1890 fire, it ceased operation in 1894. Likewise for von Fabeck's support law. Its initial success took decades to grow. Though the Aachen model soon spread to several major German cities, including Bonn, Nuremberg, Hamburg, plus 30 different Bavarian villages, solar panel prices stayed stubbornly high. As a result, nearly a quarter century after Aachen adopted its feed-in tariff, electricity produced by solar was almost negligible, less than 0.5% of German generation. As well, Pearl Street and Aachen make clear that energy transitions are highly unpredictable affairs. As much as Edison wanted to electrify the world, he never could have imagined that a full fifth of our power today would come from splitting atoms, or that most electric cars would be named after one of his fiercest rivals. Edison, in fact, first thought that the electricity would be a luxury good, something special for the rich, and he was demonstrably wrong about the way electricity would be moved across our nation. famously engaging with George Westinghouse in a war of the currents, a war that Edison definitively lost. Nor could von Fabeck predict that the Aachen model ultimately would be adopted across renewable energy resources, not just in solar, in dozens of countries, and radically transform not just many nations' energy systems, but their entire economies, while simultaneously failing to even move the needle on renewables in other countries. Finally, the Pearl Street and AUKUS sagas underscore that energy transitions are inevitably multidimensional in cause, scope, and effect. Edison may have invented the first incandescent light bulb and then conceived and created the first central power station in Pearl Street. But in reality, it was the corporate and economic innovations that Edison's former secretary Samuel Insull made far away on Lake Michigan shore in Chicago that allowed the industry to grow. Today's electricity, in other words, is a legacy of not just leaps in physics and inventions in engineering. It is also a byproduct of new ideas in business, governance, and regulation. So too for Aachen and von Fabeck, but in reverse. The policy revolution they began could not realize its true potential until innovation abounds in solar manufacturing and production, globally, in China, as well as in Germany itself, began to drive technology costs down. Looking to our current energy transition, the echoes of the lessons of Pearl Street and Aachen are obvious. Lumpiness is everywhere. Even as renewable energy production in the United States has increased precipitously, so too have our production of the exports of fossil fuels. Even as coal-fired power has decreased, use of natural gas has soared. Perhaps no truth is more pervasive in energy than the ever-presence of trade-offs. Unpredictability is also at an apex. Electric cars are far more prevalent than anyone predicted 15 years ago. Modern application of a technique long used in oil extraction to natural gas created a hydraulic fracturing boom almost no one saw coming. After decades of flat or very gradual growth in electricity demand, suddenly utilities are not sure if they can keep up. And the transition's multidimensionality is undeniable, a theme to which we will return toward the conclusion of today's lecture. For now, suffice it to say that after decades of two-party support for clean energy, energy partisanship is only growing, that even as more and more renewables are installed, 40% of new generation projects are canceled due to transmission constraints, a number even higher for renewables, and that virtually no one is paying attention to our existing nuclear fleet, even as small modular technology offers the promise of transforming the industry. What then Pearl Street and Aachen leave us with is far few easier answers than difficult questions. Can we move to 100% clean electricity? If electricity is the linchpin in the clean energy transition, can and will the vehicle fleet follow? How virtuous can the circle of creating energy used to make the infrastructure for these sectors of our economy become? Is clean energy just a climate mitigation strategy, or is its greater weight in its ability to help us adapt to climate change? Do the massive energy shifts we are undergoing add up to a transition, or are they a revolution, or, as some fear, neither? Considering these questions, having looked to the past, it may help to turn our gaze to the present and ask, what in fact is transpiring in the current energy transition? When considering energy, it is tempting to focus on a single resource or system. This is a temptation we must resist, not only because it risks myopia, but because energy resources and systems are so deeply interrelated, interwoven, and interconnected. A more useful approach is to consider the energy transition from the perspective of three primary systems that comprise its ecosystem: electricity, transportation, and the end use in industry, business, and homes. Assessing the transition from this perspective reveals a more complex and more complicated societal shift than we might glean from daily headlines. To date, electricity has shown both the most promise and the most success, and that success is only gaining momentum. A quarter of a century ago, the nation produced 88% of its electricity from fossil fuels and nuclear, and 53% from coal alone. Natural gas, as we've heard throughout the symposium, a much cleaner energy source than coal, and one the federal government once banned from electricity production, comprised 14% of our electricity generation. Renewables were stagnant, little was being added to the system, and almost all the production came from large hydroelectricity facilities. Today, this image has been turned on its head. In just 25 years, coal-fired electricity has shrunk to a mere 16% of generation, and natural gas has effectively supplanted it, comprising 43%. These are 22 numbers. I'm talking about 23 numbers. It's happening fast. At the same time, renewables have soared. They now make up 21% of the United States' overall production, a staggering rise by any measure. More vitally, virtually all of the electricity sector's momentum is in this direction. A dirty secret of all energy transitions is that path dependency necessarily slows turnover. Infrastructure's long lifespan matters. Nonetheless, almost all the new electricity generation being installed in the United States is clean. In 2023, 88%, and planned for this year, 96%. In fact, last year, for the first time since World War II, a single renewable resource accounted for the most new installed generation in the United States. The winner 80 years ago, hydro. Last year, solar. The transportation sector, like electricity, also has reason to boast. Over the last decade, electric vehicle sales have exploded, from under 65,000 in 2017 to nearly 1.2 million last year. The latter figure is a milestone record and represents nearly 8% of total vehicle sales for the year, up from its prior high of 6% in 2022. At the same time, EV charging infrastructure continues to grow, buoyed in part by the $7.5 billion investment from the bipartisan infrastructure law. Still, as steep as the curve for EV sales is today, it clearly reflects only the beginning of the transportation sector's transition. Nationally, transportation accounts for more than a quarter of our energy consumption, and more than 90% of that is fueled by fossil resources still. Gasoline alone comprises more than half our transport energy consumption, and we remain a long way from powering airplanes with anything other than petroleum products. Where we lag farther still is in other end use. Fossil fuels continue to make up half or more of energy consumption in the residential and commercial sectors, and that is before taking electricity use into account. Industry fares far worse. In 2022, a full 78% of primary energy consumption in industry came from fossil fuels, in addition to its secondary reliance on those resources through electricity. More notable, these figures are stagnant. Except for the greening of the electricity sector, they are scarcely distinguishable from what we saw a decade plus ago. What this all points to is precisely what Pearl Street and Aachen taught. The transition has begun, but it is lumpy, not smooth. Its speed and scale are unpredictable and nonlinear. And what is driving it is as complex and multivariate as the transition itself. Understanding how that shape might change and reform in the coming years is perhaps as vital as knowing its current contours. To that end, let us consider two final stories. When you think of green energy, many Americans quickly default to coloring the map in blue and red. Even in this symposium, we have sometimes slipped into this kind of thinking. It is a mistake. Last year, 4 of the top 5 wind-producing states were jurisdictions that voted for the 2020 Republican presidential candidate. These 4 traditionally red states, just these 4, also accounted for nearly half the nation's wind energy production in 2023. Top of the list by a massive margin, Texas. In fact, in 2022, Texas's nearly 19,000 wind turbines generated roughly 114 terawatt hours of electricity, accounting for more than 26% of all U.S. wind-sourced electricity. Texas also was the first state in the nation to hit the 10,000 megawatt of installed generation mark, and until 2020, it was the only state in the union with that much wind power on the grid. Wind's benefits to the Lone Star State are real. In 2022, 26,135 wind generation jobs with an average annual income of $110,000, and in 2021, $1.7 billion in gross domestic product from the industry. How is this possible? How can a state known since the mid-1800s for its oil and gas production, a state that is home to a full 2/3 of the nation's petrochemical jobs, lead the United States in wind power? Let me tell you a secret. It's not just that everything is bigger in Texas. It's also not an accident. Texas intentionally built a wind industry. This started with a 1999 law mandating significant renewable installations in the state, a target that Texas has now shot past 4 times over. 6 years later, in 2005, Texas adopted another law aimed at easing construction of large transmission lines to move power from West Texas and the state's panhandle, where wind resources are greater, to the state's cities, where people live and industry demands energy. This worked. The state has built over 3,000 miles of these highly efficient transmission lines in its competitive renewable energy zone, while other jurisdictions have remained bogged down in local resistance and bureaucratic lethargy. Another key in Texas: government didn't let politics get in the way of good policy. As former President George W. Bush, who was governor of Texas when the 1999 law passed, recounted, "One day I said to Pat Wood," apologize for the accent here, "We like wind, go get smart on it." Now that's not very Shakespearean, but he caught my drift. This small gubernatorial push wasn't all wind needed to grow in Texas, but it undoubtedly mattered. Texans' significant entrepreneurial spirit came through, and its energy system was transformed. "There's a big difference between the talkers and the doers," Bush said. And here in the state of Texas, we are doers. As much as we should celebrate the clean energy transition successes, the doing, from Texas wind and beyond, we must not ignore its costs. From here in Salt Lake, head almost due east, just shy of 1,500 miles, to the tiny village of Moscow, Ohio, in Clermont County, perched on the east side of the Ohio River, facing Kentucky, a short drive southeast from Cincinnati. This is coal country pure and true, a place that is far more Appalachia than it is Midwest. But in 2022, Vistra Energy, the owner of Moscow's William H. Zimmer power plant, a massive coal-fired facility that is the village's primary employer, announced it would shutter the plant 5 years ahead of schedule. It was the 4th local and 6th regional plant to shut down in a decade. Ohio is part of PJM, a massive regional transmission organization that operates this part of the grid, ensures reliability, and runs electricity markets for the Mid-Atlantic. One of those markets is for electricity capacity, a way of ensuring that enough generation will be available when it's needed. In the capacity auctions leading up to 2022, the Zimmer plant failed to offer a price the market would take, and this was its death knell, a financial hit on the order of $50 million. For Moscow and Clermont County, the repercussions were almost unimaginable. Zimmer's closure meant a revenue cut for the village of up to 90% and painful ripple effects. $85,000 gone from the library's budget, $500,000 from the local career center, the sale of 3 of its 4 fire stations, and cuts to the school budget so severe that high school PE classes would be held in a gymnasium with no air conditioning. It just feels like it's a punch in the stomach after punch in the stomach, reflected Tracy Miller, the local school superintendent. The pain inflicted, it's real. People lost their jobs, buildings were closed, students got redistricted. We keep trying to get ahead and then the next shoe drops. 4 plants go down, lamented Dennis Cooper, a local leader. You've got Beckyard, Zimmer, Killen, and Stewart, 4 of them. And if there's 150 workers at each one of them, you do the math. The Moscow Village Mayor, Tim Sutter, was just as pointed. We live and die with the facility next door, basically. It's sad, devastating. People need to understand that. Just as Pearl Street and Aachen offered insight into where we have been and where we now are, Texas's push for wind and the counterpunch from coal's demise in Clermont County and beyond have much to say about where we are going. They underscore the transition's promise while reminding that it does not lack peril. They complicate the narrative. Those complications highlight key hurdles the transition must not just face, but address. They challenge the notion that the new energy transition might be simple, neat, and clean, just as they emphasize not only its vital importance, but indeed its eminent possibility. 4 hurdles, 4 possibilities, 4 opportunities made clear by Texas and Clermont County bear a particular emphasis. First, energy equity matters. The easy promise that the clean energy transition will solve all rings empty when, as in Clermont County, jobs disappear, programs shutter, and the transition itself frays the community's very fabric. By some counts, 1 in 7 Americans live in energy poverty. This itself is a crisis. The transition then cuts even deeper. As one displaced coal miner in Appalachia said, there is also a sense of grief. You know, coal mining is really a part of the culture here, and it's interwoven into the way people feel about themselves and their own identity and their identity as a community. Listen to that. It's interwoven into the way people feel about themselves and their own identity and their identity as a community. A transition that fails to address its own impacts on families and communities is neither just nor clean. Second, and related, we must resist energy ideology and energy partisanship. In today's tribal America, where labels carry more weight than conversation, and claimed identities all too often trump actually listening to one another, this will not be an easy task. But the reality is that clean energy makes good sense whether you voted red or blue, whether you turn into Fox News or NPR. It's also good business. The cheapest power today is solar and wind, with natural gas sometimes competing. The clean energy transition, moreover, is built on a foundation of bipartisanship, as Texas's experience shows. This is not because politicians in Texas somehow get along better than politicians in North Dakota or North Carolina or Utah. It's because they decided to do what was right, what was good for the state. The energy transition needs this kind of leadership in gobs and gobs and again and again. Third, policymaking for the transition must be holistic. Another lesson from Texas is that the transition's policy solutions cannot be either piecemeal or one and done. Texas wind grew not just because the state adopted a renewable portfolio standard, that helped, but also because lawmakers were determined to find a way to build more transition too. This was critical. This kind of holistic problem solving must be extended to other areas of the transition as well. Affordable storage can become a skeleton key. New nuclear might be too. And right now, transmission more than anything is holding us back. As National Renewable Energy Laboratory researcher Matteo Maturi has observed, the grid is already a critical element of our energy system, but it's going to become the central piece of the future energy system. Finally, we cannot let up. An imminent threat to the energy transition is the sudden surge in new electricity demand in the United States. Some of this was part of the plan, the idea that we could electrify cars and in turn green our electricity. Some of it is not. The unexpected rise in data centers, including for still nascent artificial intelligence technology and cryptocurrency mining operations, is already stressing the grid. When by 2030, US data center electricity demand triples, as some predict, we will need even more clean energy than we now plan. Letting off the throttle now will be the equivalent of trying to run to a finish line 26 miles from here, but instead hopping on a treadmill and turning up the speed. Three summers ago, as July edged into August and autumn inched over onto the horizon, In the swirling turmoil of the global COVID-19 pandemic and the nation's reckoning with racial injustice after George Floyd's murder, I called my mother. Can I borrow your car? I need four-wheel drive. No problem. Where are you going? We arrived in Torrey, the three of us, my son and daughter and I. We got some burgers and fries and shakes, and we waited for Ryan and Jack. When do you want to try Cathedral Valley? Ryan, stepping out of his car, got right to the point. Tomorrow? Sounds good. The drive was long, longer than we thought. The dust kicking up from the tires, the ruts deep and grooved, cut farther and farther into the earth from every fresh storm. Washboard stretches, hairpin turns, mini ravines, hard-baked red dirt, sandstone shards jutting where you never expect, the Subaru's suspension shuddering. So hot. 106 on the dashboard thermometer. Is the AC broken? Crack the windows. Nope. A literal oven outside. Kids asleep in the back seat, mouths agape, music blaring, Nirvana, Pumpkins, Death Cab, The National. The Chicks, that for sure. Natalie Maine's voice, straight from God. Conversations in and out, familiar and easy, suspended like dust, glittering in the angled white sun. Sports, can the Jazz rebuild? Will it take the Cubs 71 years to win again? Politics, no comment. Food, how do we get more Bayless? Kids, potential colleges, running, no more marathons, swimming, triathlons, old ideas, new observations, old debates. Do you know the one between Paul Ehrlich and Julian Simon, this fight over whether the world is collapsing or humans are an infinite resource? Seems relevant to climate change in our energy system, or is it the other way around? Gun it. Engine revving, 40, 45, 50, huge streaming clouds of dust, no one around, no one for almost an hour. Too fast? Finally, around a bend, the road open and wide. Cathedral Valley. We've made it. Wake the kids, check the sign, drive the short turnoff road left. We get out. We talked about this for weeks. We weren't sure we could make it. Life is always fragile, and for so long this summer, it's felt it. I look and the kids are scrambling up the base. The temple of the moon looms heavy above, the temple of the sun behind. Carter and Jack's laughs echoing off the sandstone, some stupid joke. Cambria's high-pitched little girly girl sassy squeak, wait for me, guys. It's funny when these lines just come into your head. Auden, the white legs disappearing into the green water. Stegner, there is a sense in which we are all each other's consequences. There is a sense in which we are all each other's consequences. I turn. Ryan is walking after the kids. Distant white clouds, blazing blue sky, canyons and mesas never seen, shadows only on the valley's edges sweeping away. The sun is blaring. Suddenly, for a moment, it feels not hot but warm, smooth, soothing. It feels infinite, endless. It feels like all 173,000 terawatts this miraculous star delivers to the earth every day, more than 10,000 times the energy we actually consume, bearing down all at once. It feels like life. It feels like love. It feels like home. It feels like hope. Thank you.
Yeah, to see if we've got some here.
Okay. I guess we're taking a couple of questions. Not sure that.
I'm hoping there's a happy ending.
It's interesting. Sonia Carley, who was at Indiana University and is now at University of Pennsylvania, has done a lot of work on energy equity in Appalachia. I'd commend her studies to you. She's interviewed a lot of folks. It's interesting. It depends on the town. It depends on exactly sort of where they are. A lot of these people are getting new jobs actually in renewables, but some of the difference is they have to travel. So before they could live at home and then go to work every morning, come back home at night, a lot of them are now traveling. I was actually talking to her about some of the people she interviewed. Some of them have been trained to do transmission building, and they're building transmission not just in Appalachia but on the East Coast. One of the people she interviewed was on a project for 6 months in Puerto Rico. So there are possibilities, there are ways to handle this, but we need to focus on it. In the back.
Transition necessarily implies a part of this process where fossil fuels are still consistent. And a lot of this talk has been focused on what after fossil fuels, past fossil fuels. As a practitioner in this area, one of the biggest changes I've noticed in the last few years is attitudinal shift between mechanistic and even tribalistic. And now it's becoming more collaborative and cooperative. That's a really important thing. Develop properties for energy use. There are different ways to think about it. Haven't been discussed so far.
Yeah, so for those of you who couldn't hear, a comment about the fossil fuel industry and renewables industries now collaborating, working together. And I think, there are a lot of pathways we haven't explored. I mentioned early on in the talk this idea that it's not just technological innovations that we need, but it's also innovations in how we regulate, how we do business. And I think, not just in this country, but in energy itself, we need more collaboration.
Yeah, a little bit about Ohio politics. Do you see any renewables legislation?
So the question's about sort of partisanship across energy in different sectors, including in Ohio. I think I'm recused from commenting on Ohio politics, but I will say that I think it's sort of hard to know exactly what's going on. Obviously, there's a lot of money invested in different parts of the system already, and people act rationally to protect their interests. At the same time, I do think the way we've engaged in politics as a society more and more is to become very tribal, to become very identity based, and it strikes me that perhaps part of what's going on is, from a political perspective, is an effort to cast about to find things that different people can latch on to as an identity kind of politics. I think we have to resist that in the energy sphere. For all the reasons I detailed. It's good business to build more clean energy. We also need it for environmental perspectives. We need it for our kids. But it also just makes good sense. It's a safer and better way of building energy now than the way we've been doing it in the past.
You all have been extraordinarily patient throughout the past 2 days. We're grateful for your attendance and interest here for the 29th Annual Wallace Stegner Center Symposium on the Energy Transition. We're grateful to Professor Lincoln Davies, also Dean at the Ohio State College of Law. And I should add, Lincoln, that I think Wallace Stegner would be proud of your choice of words today. And with that, let me conclude by saying thank you once again to the R. Harold Burton Foundation, the Cultural Vision Fund, and the Nature Conservancy in Utah for your support for the Stegner Center Symposium. To our audience again, we thank you for your interest and support. Let me remind you that there's an evaluation form online under the Stegner Center Symposium site, And I should add that we have not selected topics for next year for the symposium or the year after, so we're wide open for suggestions, not only for the symposium, but for shorter programs. And join me again in thanking both our Wallace Stegner lecturer and all of our presenters.